Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our very first Knowledge Economy Focus Group event. And I'd now like to introduce you to Dana Winner, who is the co-chair of our AmCham Kuwait Knowledge Economy Focus Group. Dana, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very, very much, Paula, and welcome to everyone for this first ever meeting of the Knowledge Economy Focus Group of the AmCham ABCK. This is a really great moment. We've been looking forward to this a long time. And now I am really honored and very much pleased to introduce our speaker today, who will introduce us to the subject of knowledge economy and how knowledge asset management supports the knowledge economy. So we will be learning the basics. So even if you feel that you already know what it's all about, I feel certain that you will enjoy and appreciate having a review of the basics so that we all can agree together on what is the basic approach, what are the basic things we need to do in order to support and build the knowledge economy in Kuwait. So I'd like to give you an introduction to our speaker, Ron Young, who has been my teacher, my guru, in learning about knowledge asset management. I had been studying the subject for a few years before I studied with him, and I want to assure you that I learned some very important realities and basic concepts about the knowledge economy and knowledge asset management when I studied with Ron. One thing that I think is very important for all of us to know about Ron, he has a college level, master's degree level study course regarding knowledge asset management, which he designed, and it is available from Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge. So please consider that if you would like to have further studies in knowledge asset management. And another very important thing to know about Ron, though he works all over the world as a consultant, is that he has worked in the Middle East itself. He has worked quite extensively in various countries as a conference speaker, but even more exciting, he has worked with the foundation of Sheikh Mohammed in Dubai to help them start up their knowledge asset management program and learn how to disseminate that program for all of Dubai and possibly the Emirates, and hopefully beyond in the region. So he's not just one of those global consultants who goes all over the world. He's worked here in the Middle East, and he understands the challenges that we have that are very special to the region. And then just one more thing I'd like to highlight is that he is the leader of the British Standards Institute working group for the Knowledge Management System Requirements Standard, and also a member of the same group for the International Standards Organization, ISO. So that's the standard ISO 30401, Knowledge Management System Requirements. So you can see from those very important facts that he is a leader of knowledge management around the world. We prefer to say knowledge asset management, and he will explain to you why that makes a difference. That's the most important thing that I learned from him. And I hope that you will agree that it's a powerful difference. Words matter. So using the term knowledge asset management, we add more meaning to what it is we're trying to do in supporting the knowledge economy. So I hope that that is a good introduction for you to understand the value that Ron is bringing to us and the importance of our meeting today. So now I would like to hand over control of the meeting to Ron Young. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Dana. And hello, everybody. And first of all, I would like to thank the American Business Council, AmCham in Kuwait, for inviting me to speak today and share with you some of the work I've done, some of the experiences I have working with the global knowledge economy and what we call, as Dana said, knowledge asset management. So let me just very briefly tell you a little bit about Knowledge Associates. We're an international group, and pictured here is where I am based in Cambridge, UK, at St. John's Innovation Centre. And I've been there actually since 1995. The Innovation Centre was established by St. John's College, part of the University of Cambridge, in 1987. And it hosts and supports knowledge and innovation-driven companies. It's an innovation hub, in other words. It's primarily concerned with helping innovative startups with knowledge-driven products and services, but it also houses larger international organizations that we're working with, like, as mentioned, the British Standards Institution have a special unit there that is working with data analytics and artificial intelligence, which I'll be touching on. Like all knowledge and innovation hubs around the world who are closely connected with their universities, there's a lot of new knowledge occurring every day, great ideas every day, new insights are being developed every minute of the day. And so we're interested in finding the best ways, the best methods, best strategies to transform them into successful and innovative products and services. So let's get started with what is the knowledge economy and why it's important, or a brief review of it. I thought I'd start by taking a look at what artificial intelligence is saying, because it's so topical now. Although we've been working with it for years, right now, ChatGPT-3 is the talk of the world. And millions of people have been trying and playing with this in just a matter of days. So I thought I'd ask it the question, what is the knowledge economy and why is it important? And I assure you, I've not said any more at all. My role is to hopefully add value to what these tools are doing to assist us afterwards. So I asked it the two questions, and this is what it said. It came back with a couple of sentences for each in just a few seconds. I'll show you the first question. The knowledge economy, it said, refers to an economic system in which knowledge is the primary driver of growth and development, rather than traditional factors like natural resources or physical labor. It actually went on to say, in this economy, the creation, the acquisition, the dissemination, and the use of knowledge and information are crucial for economic progress and competitiveness. I think that's reasonable and quite clear. The second question, why is it important? It said the knowledge economy is important because it's transformed the way businesses and individuals work, as well as how economies grow and develop. And it went on to say it's characterized by a shift towards innovation, creativity, and intellectual property, and has led to the creation of new industries such as biotechnology, software development, and e-commerce, for example. The knowledge economy also places a high value on education and skills, leading to an increased demand for highly educated workers and specialized knowledge. Again, I think that's most reasonable, most clear, most helpful. So it answered the questions that way, and it also decided to add further, the benefits of the knowledge economy are manifold. including increased productivity, higher living standards, improved job opportunities, and the potential for sustainable economic growth. It also allows, it added, for the development of new technologies and products that can solve global challenges such as climate change, healthcare, food security. The knowledge economy is therefore a crucial driver of economic progress in the 21st century, and its importance is only set to grow in the coming years. Now, I think that's pretty useful. I think it may even well say it clearer than I can, and it responded within 3 seconds. And so I think that's a very useful start and reminder, and I hope that I will be able to add value to that. So I thought I'd share with you just some of the organizations I've worked with and their attitudes to the global knowledge economy around the world, very briefly for a few minutes. The first one is the World Trade Organization. I thought it'd be interesting to let you know that the World Trade Organization published this book, Trade in Knowledge. I think it was September last year, published by Cambridge University Press. And the term trade in knowledge is really saying in this book that it's trading in knowledge, in the knowledge economy, is an enabler towards increased competition and increased collaboration. And it sees knowledge trade as a catalyst for peace, that we're more likely to achieve that with an effective and a healthy knowledge economy. And so when I was flying back from the World Trade Center in Geneva last year with this book, it's 830 pages, by the way, of some good scholarly work. I managed to read the first 100, and I've eventually read the whole thing. I would definitely recommend that for those of you that want to dive deeper into that particular aspect, trade in knowledge, and how that's trade in peace as well. If we go to the European Commission, in particular, it's the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. The importance they put on knowledge and the knowledge economy is very much on improving knowledge management and collaborative working within the European Commission. And also, and in particular, quoting the Joint Research Centre's strategy of 2030, to play a central role in creating, managing, and making use of collective scientific knowledge for better EU policy making. And that's, I think, the key point there. If we go to my teacher, the late Professor Peter Drucker, I often use his quote because he looks at it, and in fact, this comes from his book, Management Challenges for the 21st Century. And I'll read it as well. The most important and indeed truly unique contribution of management in the 20th century was the 50-fold increase in the productivity of manual work. And that really came from management science, of course. But he went on to say, the most important contribution management needs to make in the 21st century is similarly to increase the productivity of knowledge work and the knowledge worker. And I'll touch on that as well. Looking to a few others, the World Bank. First got involved with the World Bank in the mid-90s when they published the Global Knowledge Economy, which was attempting to measure knowledge in the world's economy, how effectively each country in the world was managing its knowledge, creating a global knowledge index which was based on a methodology broadly of 4 pillars, that countries that were managing their knowledge well were those that had the right economic and institutional regime to provide efficient use, incentives and efficient use of existing and new knowledge, and the flourishing, most importantly, in my opinion, of entrepreneurship. The second pillar was ensuring that the country's people's need for the special education and skills will be created and will be used well. Pillar 3 is, this is all supported by and enabled by effective information and communication infrastructures in the country. And pillar 4, the innovation system, is looking at the country's ecology, innovation ecology, the research centers, the universities, the think tanks, the consultants, and other organizations must be capable of tapping into this growing stock of global knowledge. That I found very useful, and it provided a global knowledge index score for each country in the world. But that work was stopped a few years ago by the World Bank, but it was carried on by a partnership between UNDP and the Mohammed bin Rashid Knowledge Foundation, AmCham Knowledge Foundation. They also now annually produce what they call also the Global Knowledge Index. There's one example here. You can freely download this at the bottom of the picture of the front page. It's got knowledge for all with a capital 4. And it's an interactive map, but they're slightly different with their methodology. They create a global knowledge index, but they also look at education in a little more depth, pre-university, technical and vocational, higher education, then research and development and innovation, then information and communications technology, then the economy enablers itself. The World Trade Book, I don't know what's happening here. Of course, everybody will get a copy of the slides, but then the European Commission, I talked briefly about the Joint Research Centre. Then I talked about Professor Peter Drucker and in red to increase the productivity of knowledge work and the knowledge worker. And then the World Bank Global Knowledge Economy, its knowledge asset methodology looks at the 4 pillars, okay? And then that was taken on further. There's the UNDP Global Knowledge Index with MBRF Knowledge Foundation in Dubai. And that's the one that links all the different countries. If everybody's interested, you can see the ranking that's given. The ranking is in very small print there on the right-hand side of each country, okay?
So that's working. If you just keep moving down on the left side, that'll...
that's what I'm going to have to do, I think. Right. We took this relationship further with MBRF and the British Standards Institution when we started to look further at the Global Knowledge Index and also started to look at standards and how they could contribute to looking at the effectiveness of each nation in the global knowledge economy. And we today are still very interested, and I thought I'd share with you the work that's going on between BSI, International Standards Organization, standards, and bringing them together into better collaboration, better knowledge management, and better innovation management. At least we saw several standards which we call the knowledge cluster of standards, but we really need to look at the whole to see how they could actually enable private and public organizations to better achieve their objectives, of course, but also, especially in this case, towards achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, I'll just look on the knowledge economy broad picture at our work with the Asian Productivity Organization. And the Asian Productivity Organization they actually, their mission is to increase the knowledge productivity of Asia. And that is where, if you're interested in their books, if you go onto the APO Tokyo website, they are the secretariat. It's an intergovernmental organization for 20 Asian countries. Under publications, you can freely download these books that look at knowledge productivity, private sector, public sector. I find them very useful. But moving on from that briefly, conscious of the time now, this cluster of standards I briefly want to mention again. In the center is knowledge management, ISO 30401, published in 2018. But it also works hand in hand with other standards. Most people, of course, are familiar with the top standard, which is quality management, the most successfully selling standard in the world with over 1 million organizations today. What's interesting is that in 2015, they added to the quality standard that organizations need to demonstrate they're managing their organization's knowledge effectively. Because quality knowledge, high quality knowledge, is a key part of quality management, if you think about it from that point of view. But also on the left-hand side, you can see the standards for communication and information. Information is the lifeblood of knowledge, and therefore we can't really have the most effective knowledge management if we have the least effective information management. They work together. ISO 27001 is the most popular one that deals with information asset management and cybersecurity. Also, collaborative partnerships in the top right. ISO 44001 is extremely helpful for helping organizations better develop strategic knowledge partnerships through collaboration, because we know that the best way to create new knowledge is through effective collaboration. And the bottom, you can see in the bottom left, asset management standard 55001 is a standard that deals with both tangible assets like airports and energy and buildings and hospitals, and intangible assets. And on the right, we have innovation management. There's a family of innovation management standards. The first one was 56002, which is guidelines for better innovation management. And if you want to know more about this, the other book I'd recommend, which was edited by Patricia Ordonez de Pablos and Leif Edvinsson, is Intellectual Capital in the Digital Economy. I'm glad to say I have a chapter there, which talks not just about that cluster of standards, but in standards as well, so we can start to measure the knowledge assets in a better way. And so we go to the next stage. This is where I want to talk for a couple of minutes about a framework, an integrated framework, which attempts to make it easy for organizations. There are over 20 standards actually that deal with all of this, which is too much for a lot of organizations to invest in time. We have put this framework together so organizations can get the essence of this. Very briefly, but if you want more details, we have a 15-page paper that we'll willingly send to you that goes into depth. Very briefly, on the bottom in the red, horizontally, are the standards I've just talked about, the key standards: quality management, communications and information management, collaboration and co-creation, knowledge management, innovation management, and knowledge asset management. 5 pillars. In fact, there is a theory of change behind this, which makes it easier for organizations that if they know the conditions for these standards and the requirements, don't necessarily have to be certified, but are aware of the requirements and put the right conditions in place, things naturally occur. Let me give you one example briefly. If we start at the bottom left with communications and information management, provided there is enough trust in the organization, provided there is sufficient trust, and this is a key principle, people will naturally communicate. We can't help it. We naturally will communicate if there's sufficient trust. We will not if there isn't. And if the trust is even greater and builds, people will naturally want to cooperate with one another. And they will naturally want to then collaborate. It arises, it's an emergent property, if you like. It's, if the principles are in place, these things will happen. When people are collaborating effectively, they cannot help themselves co-create. A key part of effective collaboration, when we're validating, when we're sharing, when we're testing, is co-creation of new knowledge. And that naturally leads to the fact that we can't help ourselves but learn faster. Naturally, sufficient trust builds the desire for information communication, builds the desire and ability to collaborate and co-create, builds the way we accelerate our learning and create more knowledge and need to manage our knowledge better, which all feeds into, naturally, better the innovation process. We have our specialist R&D departments, of course, but this is inclusive. It brings everyone into the organization to contribute as well through these activities. And you will see in a moment when I go through a case that knowledge asset management integrates all of that together. So that's the horizontal. There's a lot to it, but I hope I've briefly illustrated that if the principles are in place, things naturally happen easier. The vertical is simply saying that it should be considered ultimately at all 5 dimensions: individuals, teams, the entire organization, the way organizations collaborate with one another in strategic partnerships, inter-organization and global. And so that's all I have time to just introduce to you, the point that there are integrated frameworks available that will take the best of these international standards to make it easier for you to see the whole picture. This is also very good to use as an assessment tool. As an organization or as a team, you might say, put across where you think you are doing these things well enough or not. And then you can decide perhaps what you should be focusing on in the next 6 to 12 months. It's not a straight line, as I show there, towards from bottom left to top right. That means the direction is towards better and social and knowledge value. Private organizations use this framework and they focus more on business excellence and profitability, but it works for both private and public. And so I wanted to move from the framework to the next point, which was how can entities be aligned to at least the ISO standard, the knowledge management standard, as that's central to the whole thing. And I spend a couple of minutes on this. I want to introduce again the importance of principles. You know, when I first chaired the BSI Knowledge Management Standards Committee way back in 2000. And we spent 3 years and decided that because knowledge management was a rapidly evolving discipline, we didn't need a standard, we need what's called halfway standards. They're called publicly available specifications, PAS documents. That's what we did in 2000 to 2003, and they were very useful. And then in 2015, I was approached again by BSI to say, ask me if I would chair the newly formed Knowledge Management Standards Committee together with the ISO as a standard. And I initially said no, because I thought it's a rapidly emerging discipline and things hadn't changed, until they told me that the big difference with standards, particularly ISO, what's called management system standards, is that they are principles-led, not just a checklist of requirements that we all tick off. But within every one of those standards in the cluster that I've mentioned to you, it states the principles, and from the principles, what the requirements would be to turn those principles into reality. That got me interested, very much the notion of principles-led standard. And the reason it got me interested is very simple. In today's world, technology is changing by the day, rapidly by the day, and will continue to do so. In today's world, even processes, our business processes are changing quite rapidly over time. And many of our processes are actually enabled by innovative technology, which is changing fast. So they're changing fast. Inevitably, people will join organizations and leave organizations. That's the nature. Therefore, people, process, and technologies are changing all the time, some more rapidly than others. Principles, if they're well identified, if they're well thought out, they are likely to change less. And if they're true principles, they're changeless. And that got me interested in the whole thing, because I would put to you that principles properly implemented in organizations and standards are not just requirements, they are transformative to the organization. And when we write the standards, there are two key words I wanted you to be aware of: shall and should. If a standard is a requirement standard, it says you shall do this, and there are 52 in the knowledge management standard. Shall. If you have the words should in a standard, it means it's not a requirement for certification if you want to go that route, but it's highly recommended. So it's requirements and recommendations. And here looks like a busy slide, but just briefly, and again, I can provide you with a paper for more detail if you're interested. You will see this is the structure of the ISO standard. You've got boxes going from number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. They are the sections of the standard. Sections 1, 2, and 3 are introduction, setting the context, and the key principles of the standard. Then section 4 is understanding the organization's context. Section 5 is focusing on leadership and planning. Section 6 is taking that planning to develop the objectives for the knowledge management initiative. Section 7 is making sure we have the resources. Do we have the right competencies, the knowledge competencies? Are people educated and aware? Have we documented what needs to be documented and is critical? Section 8 is for the operation of the standard in action. Section 9 is measuring and monitoring and evaluating the performance. And finally, section 10 is continuous improvement. Those of you that are familiar with the ISO standards, it's the plan, do, check, act across those. This summarizes, if you like, the 52 shall and embeds the should, but it's primarily to look at the shall. So moving on from that, it's good to know that also BSI in October last year, our committee in the BSI, we published the knowledge management guidelines to help people implement the standard as well, which again is a useful document. So now in this basically 7 or 8 minutes, I'd like to briefly go through with you 2 cases with how governments are doing this with knowledge, and especially talk a bit more about knowledge asset management. I've already mentioned the MBRF Knowledge Foundation in Dubai. They were one of the first organizations in the Middle East in August 2019 that actually became certified with the ISO 30401 2018 standard. Make the point here, you don't have to be certified unless there's a good reason, as there is a good reason for a knowledge foundation to be certified. You may just want to buy the standards, which are the cost of expensive books, really, and just use them for assessment, for benchmarking, and for guidance yourself. But in this case, they went through the full ISO certification program. And although you probably can't see this, it's a busy slide, I'll point out to you the key parts. The knowledge management standard on the left-hand side was published in November 2018. In December, we ran some workshops. MBRF run knowledge summits annually. And in that summit, we ran workshops on the ISO 30401. They then started work in January 2019 with the first assessments of how they're doing against the 52 shalls and whatnot to identify where there were gaps. And then during that next few months, 3 months in particular, they started to apply the methodology which enables the organization to address each of those shall requirements: context, vision, objectives, stakeholders analysis, identifying the key knowledge domains. That means those key areas of knowledge that if you really could manage it better would make a big difference to achieving objectives. We looked at how ready they were for change, et cetera, and developed the strategy, then produced the manual as required, the documentation manual required, ran internal workshops, and used platforms to do this and finalized this. And in August, the external audit and certification was granted. So I guess it's about 9 months in their case from initially starting to promote this in workshops to eventual certification. And finally, I'd like to just talk a little and give you a case of the UK public sector with knowledge asset management, which is not just knowledge management, but focusing a bit more on the measurements and the reporting and the very notion of what is an asset and what is a knowledge asset. We first worked in a European Commission collaborative research project and published the findings of that research project in 2003 called Knowledge Asset Management. Basically, it set out the methodology to say that in the lower gray box, you can see 3 types of knowledge asset. Human beings are the greatest knowledge assets and always will be. Equally, we can have what's called structural knowledge assets, patents, copyrights, and various intellectual properties and knowledge bases that are codified assets as opposed to people assets, and also market assets, which is the way the organization relates to other organizations, and financial assets. And we looked at how they are interdependent and highly interrelated so that we could actually move from human to financial, from financial to markets to structure. It is in itself a discipline which is aimed at enabling the organization to identify its knowledge assets, measure them, and report on them. And here's 2 quick cases now. The first was Dubai Police, who wanted to apply this methodology initially with their human knowledge assets. And here you can see they actually set up their Knowledge Asset Award several years ago for outstanding results for their human knowledge assets. And then in the UK, they started to look at the structural assets. And in December 2021, the UK government produced a document in April 2021, beg your pardon, a document on the left-hand side, Getting Smarter, a strategy for knowledge and innovation assets in the public sector. A companion document to that, as shown in the middle, is a draft guidelines on knowledge assets in government. And on the right-hand side, you have the rose book, the rose-colored book, which is the guidance on knowledge asset management. These three documents were produced as a result of a 2018 UK government report that stated that within the UK public sector, there was tremendous and highly valued innovation occurring, especially in the Ministry of Defence, especially in our health service, to take two examples. And highly valuable innovation was occurring, but it was not reflected properly, if at all, in any financial balance sheet and in any valuations. And as importantly, it was not being fully utilized and cross-fertilized, if you will, across government departments. The report of April 2021 set out the implementation strategy to overcome these barriers that were set out in the 2018 budget report. The resultant Rose Book, the guidance, was published in 2021, and now it's actually been handed over to the Government Office for Technology Transfer. And I wanted to just take a couple of these points. These come literally from the Rose Book, but it will give you an idea of how the UK government see knowledge assets. They see them as valuable public assets, critical to the delivery of public services. They say it's the responsibility of every public servant to manage them in order to ensure that this value is maximized and not lost. I go even further. I say it's the fiduciary requirement of every director of every company, of every organization, public or private, to effectively manage their assets. And knowledge assets are key. And so this book, the Rose Book, helps organizations in the public sector identify what knowledge assets are and what their knowledge assets are, and the value, and start to look at the value and the impact beyond their original purpose. And that value, of course, as they say, can be social, economic, and financial, and is often a combination of all of these. And every government officer now is charged in the public sector to appoint somebody responsible for knowledge asset management, and they are charged with developing a knowledge asset strategy as well. And so that is readily available from the UK government, and the references here, and you can take a look at that. I'm conscious of the time, but I want to just spend 2 minutes to finish by saying artificial intelligence, I started to talk about. I want to finish by saying that it will have a big impact on knowledge management and knowledge asset management. It will help us tremendously. It will raise the bar of our standard even further. And our job is to then be able to interpret it, analyze it, and add value to these tools. You may be interested to know on the right-hand side, there are two more standards. There's ISO 22989, which is artificial intelligence terminology, and our knowledge management consulting committee, BSI, have been consulting with them on terms like machine intelligence, knowledge, just to make sure there is clarification. But equally, right now, also just below that, is the ISO 42001, which is a draft international standard, but you can buy it from ISO at the price of a book, a good book. And this is going into information technology, artificial intelligence management systems. We see a great role of artificial intelligence. We see a great role of new technologies like blockchain and tokens for knowledge asset management. But I just wanted to briefly mention it's all part of the big picture of a global knowledge-driven economy. I haven't touched on knowledge economics. I haven't got time today to do that. But just to make the point that our industrial economic theories suits us well for the industrial economy, but the knowledge economy needs further instruments. And in that regard, I would finish by saying I won't go through our services. You can look at that later. organizations that manage their knowledge assets wisely, in my opinion, are going to be the leaders. So I'm sorry for the rush, sorry for the confusion on the slides, but I think I'll stop there now and hand back. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ron. And as always, I learned something new, lots of new things. And you reminded me of some sources that I put on my reading list and haven't read yet. And now those will go to the top of the queue, especially the Rose Book, because here in Kuwait, we're especially concerned with helping the Kuwait government to fulfill their own vision for 2035 to develop and establish a Kuwait knowledge-based economy.
Right.
So let's open it up for Q&A. Of course, I have several questions. Good to see Lena Adluni here. She spoke a couple of days ago, so very, very well on the same subject. So Lena, good to see you, and welcome to ask any questions or discuss any issues with Ron. And everybody, it's open for questions. I have the participants window open. Just raise your hand. We have a lot of people online, 34 people right now. So it'll be more orderly if people raise up their hand to indicate they want to speak. Yes, Paula.
Thank you, Dana. I think just for the sake of time, we can read off the questions from the chat.
Yes,
and then whoever wants to stay to discuss, then please feel free to do so. So the first question comes from Amr Wagih from, he works with Kadipa. In your opinion, what are the most important skills that employees need in order to effectively manage assets, for example, in the knowledge-based economy?
Let me make sure I understand that correctly. What are the most important measures, did you say?
Skills that employees need to effectively manage assets in the knowledge-based economy.
Yes, of course, skills. Very good question from Emma, yes. The critical skills that have been identified, of course, are this problem solving, critical problem solving. We have to be digitally literate, of course, but we accept that as going. But particularly critical problem solving skills are what's needed to add even further value to knowledge asset development, but also it's the measurements. The most exciting part of knowledge asset management is that organizations are now starting to develop, and they have measurements, and we need to know what they are, how to apply them, and how to measure them. And there is another ISO standard, I'm afraid, ISO 30414, which is in the same family, and that lists 63 measurements and skills that are required for people and organizations to pay attention to. And I would recommend that. So knowledge management is 30401, as I've mentioned, but 30414 is very helpful in that regard.
Thank you, Ron. And the second part of the question is, how can companies balance the need to invest in technology and data analytics with the need to develop and retain talented employees who can effectively manage assets?
I couldn't hear that, I'm afraid. Would they need to, I'm sorry, you have to.
Sorry. How can companies balance the need to invest in technology and data analytics with the need to develop and retain talented employees who can effectively manage assets?
Right, okay. Well, you know, we are talking about transformation management, and typically today, most organizations talk about digital transformation management and the need to invest heavily in that. And in fact, most organizations are reinventing themselves and renewing themselves, certainly, by digital transformation strategies. But that's one aspect. It's no good having the best digital capability if you don't have, you know, the best knowledge, if we don't have the best processes in place, if you don't have the best methods to be able to do it. And in this case, it's not technology investment, it's people and education and skills. It's understanding asset management. We're all familiar very much with our human resource departments and the good work human resource departments do. But in the knowledge asset world, we see people as assets to create value with their own knowledge capital, working together with the organization in new knowledge working contracts and ways. And there needs to be equal, if not more, investment in people and effective understanding of asset management, knowledge asset management.
Thank you. And Amir, does that answer your question? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Yes, perfect. And what is one baseline step that companies or entities can take in order to start to build their own knowledge asset management frameworks? How can they start?
The first thing that they should do is take a look at what others are doing, especially the example I've given with the UK government sector. This is downloadable. They are very actively pursuing, and that will then enable organizations to better determine what's right for them. In any event, we always recommend that an organization that's interested in knowledge asset management conducts a pilot, a small pilot in an important area in the organization where the principles of knowledge asset management can be tested and measured so senior management can see the benefits to the organization from that pilot and then expand it accordingly. So take a good look at what's currently around, not least, I believe the UK government are leaders in this area in the public sector today, nationally. Interestingly as well, they have a scheme running right now to provide incentives. Any public organization in the UK that wants to better identify their knowledge assets as a pilot, or even further, they're providing funding from between UK money, £10,000 and £250,000. There's a fund of several million, which the UK government is offering to public sector departments to invest in getting to understand its true benefits.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, we implemented ABCK-AmCham while I was working for DSQ Software Limited. Could you please expand on this people capability maturity model?
People capability maturity model. Right. Very briefly, there are several models around, but we have one which actually looks at the knowledge asset management process itself, and it breaks it into 9 distinct phases. And we are able to work with the company easily to look at each of those phases and assess the people capability that exists today and what is needed. So it helps with identifying the competencies gaps. Knowledge competencies are important. We talk about competence, of course, but knowledge competencies are those special competencies that we need that are critical for the knowledge economy. And this maturity model aims to identify and help organizations develop those capabilities.
Okay, so I'm sorry to say we're at the last question for today. Would anybody like to open their microphone and ask the last question? Otherwise, I'm going to take the opportunity. I'll give you a moment. Would anybody like to pose the last question? Okay, looks like I get to do it. So Ron, thank you so much for everything that you've talked about. You've given us a great overview of what we need to think about in order to progress the Kuwait knowledge economy and given us a great foundation. I appreciate your emphasis on how AI affects or impacts our work in knowledge asset management and the knowledge economy. As you can imagine, it's quite a hot topic, digital transformation, AI, and such like this. And we have a tendency in Kuwait to get really excited about hot topics. But as you also know, we've been talking about a knowledge-based economy in Kuwait for many years, well over a decade. I introduced the first knowledge publicly available KM training course in 2006 here in Kuwait. So sometimes that's a hot topic. So what can you say to us about what you see in the region, what you see in the Emirates that might help us to stay on target and to focus on progressing rather than getting excited about hot topics?
Right. I think it's worth mentioning, first of all, that when we look at the Emirates, when we look at different parts of the world, Asia, when we look at America, when we look at Europe, there are, first of all, different attitudes, beliefs when it comes to the importance of knowledge, first and foremost. Some areas rate knowledge much, much higher than others. Technology is always a key driver, and sometimes that's for good and sometimes that's for not so good. But artificial intelligence will have such a huge impact. It already is, but now it's becoming so much more visible that will drive a lot of the organizations, I believe, in the Emirates to want to look at this much, much, much closely, even though they're being driven by the AI. And as you say, a hot topic. But I mentioned in the beginning that where we're based at St. John's Innovation Centre, we have the British Standards Institute special team on analytics and AI. And what they're doing is they're looking at all the standards, including quality standards, and AI is being embedded so it can start to predict where an organization may not be in compliance in the future as well. This is going to, I would say, and I mean it respectfully, wake up quite a few organizations when they start to see the game has changed, the ball game has changed. New skills are required. I think that's going to be the key driver around the world, not just the Emirates, but around the world. But for me, of course, what I'd really like to see is it being driven by the true understanding of the need to move to knowledge assets and the value that they create and the principles behind them. And that is education, education, education. And to the degree that the education establishments in the Emirates embrace this, that could be the true, deeper key driver. I can't say whether that will happen or not. I can only share with you what I've experienced so far. And I didn't mention, for example, the work we did with Dubai Municipality, who have already, for several years now, combined knowledge and innovation and looking at the assets that this is actually producing and better ways to manage. So it's happening.
Great. That's great. That's good to know, encouraging. Well, Paula, back to you for the final closure of the meeting and your further instructions.
Thank you so much, Dana. Thank you so much, Ron, for such an insightful discussion. Again, this is our first ever Knowledge Economy Focus Group event, so this is very exciting, and hopefully we can move on to the next one next time for, I think you said knowledge economics, correct?
Yes.
Maybe a second session might be in place. So we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for giving us this knowledge, and we will be sure to share the presentation with the participants. Just don't forget to send an email to communications@amchamkuwait.org, and we'll be sure to share that with you. And I believe the presentation also has Ron's contact information in case you want to further discuss with him or you want to inquire with him about consultancy. So thank you all very much, and we wish you all a great day ahead. Again, thank you, Ron and Dina, for putting this together.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.